Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today we are reviewing this. This is QNAP's new router, the QHora-322. Still not a big fan of that name, by the way. This is the second QNAP QHora router that I have talked about here on the channel, and it has to be said that this is not the same as pretty much any other router I've talked about on the channel, for one very specific reason. This is a router that does not have Wi-Fi, and for the 90% of you that just left, I understand. These days we always think about routers as a Wi-Fi thing. The idea that a router does not have any kind of wireless protocol built into it seems absurd. However, there are lots of utilizations and deployments where a router sans wireless connectivity actually makes a great deal of sense. Certainly business sectors where a lot of internet-based services that are provided to businesses arrive with very complex and very comprehensively detailed ISP routers bundled in with them, you will want that to act as the external exchange and at the same time have your internal network managed by another subsystem in front of that router. On the other hand, you may be utilizing a router system where you want your internet point going into your business or home to be incredibly comprehensively secure, but also have a tremendous amount of bandwidth to play with, and then after that add wireless protocols such as mesh routers in the local area network or sub-routers either from QNAP or other devices. There is a demand out there for routers that do not have wireless capabilities, just nowhere near as high as traditional routers on the market. And if I had to use a word to describe this router, it ain't going to be traditional, because this has a very specific kind of user in mind. And throughout this video, we are going to talk about something known as SD-WAN, or QuWAN, as QNAP's own variation of that is. Now, over the years, things have changed with the way we communicate with data, both with each other and as a business across multi-site deployment and with our clients and end users. Other services have been rolled in. It used to be a time where it was just emails. What a wonderful time that was. And things have fast forwarded drastically to include things like voice over IP protocol there. Then you've got website-based and exchange servers in between, managing backups, managing surveillance, managing off-site, having primary sites and multiple sub-sites that need to be able to access data in one location as a main storage and access point for synchronization, while still maintaining and creating their own data at the same time. During that, it's about priorities. It's about being able to manage these hundreds, if not thousands, of exchanges that are completely unique in certain ways, but generally can be overseen as different tiered levels of priority. And that's where SD-WAN comes in, while maintaining and in some cases increasing security, also does a better job of managing different identities and IPs over the internet, and at the same time being able to on the fly prioritize different exchanges more than others, more than traditional network and internet connectivity outside of a single building environment and onto that multi-site deployment. So that's enough talking about that. We will come back to that later on, but that introduces us to this. This router, the QHora-322, is a 10 gigabit Ethernet and 2.5 gigabit Ethernet router, and indeed those ports can be used as WAN. But that's enough of that. Let's crack on with what we get for our money. And for our money, this is not a cheap little router, of course, because what you're looking at here is a router that kind of pertains and attempts to be somewhat of a merger between a router and a switch. And that was kind of what I said about my previous review of the QHora that came before this, because that device was a Wi-Fi 6 10 gigabit Ethernet router. This is just very similar product, but with ramping up the internal hardware that we'll talk about in a bit, and ramping up the network connectivity, prioritizing that over wireless. This is going to be an intriguing device to discuss. So if we have a look what we get for our money, we've got our external PSU, a 36 watt external PSU. Also got a Cat 6E 2 meter cable there, and again just the one cable, but that's not really unusual when it comes to a switch or router. Next we got our external mains, and again it's a Mickey Mouse 3-pinner there at the top. And finally we have our router. That's it for the box, apart from, of course, information on our warranty and setup, a 2-year warranty, and first time in installation guide. Pop that down there. Get all that off, we'll leave the box, won't we? We'll go through the software later on in the video. But for now, let's take a good long look at this device, because it's a lovely sleek design on this one. The lights in this studio are going to be problematic looking at this, of course. But it's a plastic external chassis. It's got a brushed effect on that side, and the other side more of a kind of normal matte there. There's ventilation on either side, and it also has an active cooling system inside. There is an internal fan in this, so I'll let you know about the noise when we've got it deployed. We've got LEDs there on the front to give us real-time information on, network, remote connectivity, power and activity. And on the bottom, we've got no continued ventilation there. All the ventilation is just on those sides, but we do have those rubberized feet and a metal base there. So before we talk about the network connectivity and the LAN, of course, WAN, the exchange and stuff like that, this 9-port switch arrives with an ARM-based processor inside, a CN9130, and again, that's a decent CPU. I don't know if you guys recalled, I talked about a 4x 10 gigabit Ethernet NAS here on the channel recently, the TS435XEU, which is a 1U 4x dual 10GBE rack mount. This is the same CPU. It's a quad-core ARM V8, so 64-bit ARM inside there, and it's arrived with 4 gig of DDR4 memory. That's incredible for a router to have that kind of hardware. Normally you hear router, you hear Qualcomm, that's it. So that's a decent amount of hardware being contained in this rather compact device. Now, if we have a little look there on the rear, we can look at that network connectivity there, because there's a lot to get behind. So, first and foremost, we've got our 3 10GBE ports there on port 1, 2 and 3. Now on the other side we have our connections here in 2.5 GBE, and we have 6 2.5 GBE ports all ranked up there. That is an enormous amount of network connectivity, and when you think about the exchange there, so you've already got 15 gigabit Ethernet there, connectivity external via the 2.5s, and another 30 via those 10 gigabit Ethernet ports. Now, so keep saying 10 gigabit Ethernet. It's worth remembering that there are WAN or LAN identities that can be assigned to those ports. So again, I'm going to keep saying gigabit Ethernet there, but we know really I'm just saying about Cat and copper connections. Which brings me on to that point about copper. I'm kind of surprised that one of these ports isn't a 10 GBE SFP fiber combo port there. Given the clear enterprise nature of this device and the distance and proximity and kind of large distance coverage with communication is key on this, I'm kind of surprised one of them isn't fiber, because fiber of course is, although more expensive because of things like transceivers, covers significantly more distance than traditional copper connectivity there using Cat cables and RJ45 or 10G base T. But of course there are adapters you can get. They're about 1 to 200 nickel depending on when you shop around. So it's not the end of the road. Now there is a USB port there on the rear as well, which is USB 3.2 Gen 1, so 5 gigabits per second, and you can attach a USB port in there. But do bear in mind with a USB that you connect to this, you're only going to be able to access it as like an FTP server. You can't use QFile or any of the QNAP apps, which again, a little disappointing given they're a NAS manufacturer. Again, I have used the software with this before, QuRouter, and we will be looking at it again in just a moment. But even when I did use it back then, it was mostly really, really good. I just was really surprised that some of the kind of NAS-based features and services that QNAP are so good at weren't brought over in the same way Synology did with their router systems. Now, I bring up Synology and their routers there because this is something that, again, classically defines QNAP when it comes to their solutions compared to, their biggest rival Synology. When Synology roll out products, generally they always feel, for the most part, a bit safe in terms of hardware. I think that's pretty valid to say. They've never really broke the mold many times. There's a few exceptions, NVMe's on a desktop, that sort of thing. But when it comes to the hardware, generally they do not go down a road unless it's been pretty well trodden elsewhere. They prioritise their software more than anything. Now with QNAP, they still do put a lot of emphasis behind their software, as you will see in a moment with QRouter, but at the same time, you can't help but feel that when it comes to hardware, That is where their main strength is. And this has, in terms of hardware, some serious potential. And whether you're going to use this behind an existing router or as your primary router with a wireless router to take care of those wireless exchanges on board is something we can look at. But for now, what we should do is get this set up and log into that software, take a little look around on the management of this device. So let's log in to our QHora-322. Okay, so I've logged into the QHora-322 web-based GUI. It is also worth highlighting you can access this with mobile applications, and I believe there is a client tool out there as well. I found the device on the local area network using QFinder, and again, that's the same tool we use for NAS. But before we go on any further, it's worth highlighting a few things. One, and I'm sure it's going to annoy a lot of you, I'm not really able to show you a lot of the QWAN capabilities of this device. For all of my big talk about it, I do not have the scope of setup here on the channel to really show this off. I could log in with my QNAP ID, maybe look up some different NAS devices and try and manage a network, but that wouldn't really show off the external WAN benefits of SD-WAN and indeed QWAN there. So unfortunately, that is not going to be covered a lot here. Also, you may notice at the top that it is highlighted as an insecure network. That's largely because I get through so many SSL certificates and, you know, let's encrypt and stuff, secure certificate protocol during my setups that I've not enabled one on this. So don't worry, it's very easy to remedy that, and I am accessing this on the local area network. It's nothing to do with the QNAP, and it's all to do with security certificates my side. But here we go. This is our system here, and I've already played with a lot of the settings just to show them off. This is the main dashboard, and again from here there's a few shortcuts whether you want to go directly into managing your network interface there. And again, I know it sounds really small, but I do love any kind of router, switch, any kind of management that gives me a graphical interface there. I think it's all too often that we're seeing devices arriving without that on board. It's a very small detail, but it's something that you would be surprised is weirdly absent, and I think it's really important to a physical overview as well, give you some topography there. Now, as you can see, if we dig in, the WAN there we've got coming in now on a 1 gig speed going into one of those 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports there. I've got it enabled. There's some data going up and down, and we can configure a few things. We can kill it at a moment's notice if we choose. We can also assign dynamic or fixed ranges there, or not ranges, identities. And again, all of that can be enabled and disabled and configured on the fly very easily. But you may notice when we go to the LAN port, it's only listing a handful there. As you can see there at the bottom, only listing ports 2, 3, and 4. And the reason for that being is because I've assigned other ports to either bridges that I've created between ports, combining them, or creating an individual VLAN there that combines all of those there. So to go into the VLAN, I've created a VLAN here, nice and easy on the fly, that allowed me to combine one of those 10Gb ports along with 2 of the 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports there. Now again, I can broaden that scope. I don't have to assign it specifically to tagged or untagged IPs if I choose. I can be a little more generalized if I choose, and I can create multiple of those on the fly as you might expect, as well as assigning fixed identities or not. And of course, you can have a little bit more dynamicism to access IPs on that network if you choose to as well. Again, creating them is very straightforward and easy, and it takes a little more than a minute or so to do it. And you can combine those ports very easily on that network, so it's kind of linked to those and not to the wider network if you choose. Same goes for if you want to bridge and combine, have them running together in certain cases. So for example, if we given that all of those ports are being in use, if we go for, say, LAN 3, for example, because at the moment ports 2 and 3, we can combine that as well. If we choose, we can come out with our new bridge, or we could go for bridge test. From there, give it a description, you know, change up the MTU, open up the bandwidth a bit, as well as assigning that identity to that bridged connection very easily. All of that on the fly. It's very straightforward then. Again, this is what I mean about some routers, and I'll talk about this a little bit more towards the end of the video, but a lot of routers and switches find it very difficult to toe a line between overly complex and requiring a system admin and something more domestic users can access. I still think a lot of the settings here are still quite technical high, but you can see that QNAP have made measures in QRouter to kind of bridge the gap a little bit. So Again, I've got a dynamic identity on this device, or particularly in one of those ports at least I'm going through now, but that can be changed, and you can change a lot of the routing and the routing tables on this router to allow certain protocol internally to see or not see, as well as open up the bandwidth there between V4 and V6. Now, if we go to the client database there, as devices get connected to the device, you can, over time, sort of get a nice comprehensive list of everyone that's ever connected with the system. And if you choose to, start adding and blocking clients as you see fit. As you can see there, there's my client information, the machine I'm connected to right now, and just information on its long-term connections over time. Again, this would be more important in my eyes on a wireless device, but it's still nice to have that option there. It's still quite rudimentary, it has to be said, but not too shabby. Now, again, as you might expect, NAT and firewall settings, we're seeing the same pro and con. The pro, of course, is the fact that it's very quick and easy to change those rules on the fly, and that goes for whether you're enabling that firewall or if you want to dick around with the NAT settings, or go straight into a DMZ and open things up, as well as enabling and opening ports for certain appliances. Of course, do at your own risk. But on the flip side, as always, doing so always tends to be significantly less user-friendly, as this is still something of a network kind of techie subject, and it's very hard to dumb these things down without invariably lowering your security level. That's why, as you may have noticed earlier on, when I did want to change a lot of those NAT settings and start playing around with some of these rules, it insisted that we opened up and enabled that service port there as a fallback. So again, all of that can be enabled, but once again, short of the odd kind of helpful eye there on screen that will give you a little bit of information, for the most part, you are kind of on your own there, and that is where your system tech admin steps in. You can take advantage of a lot of QNAP's own services, whether you're going to use the QNAP Cloud Remote Access DDNS or your own. But of course, if you do use that, do bear in mind that even if you are using QNAP's own routing point there, I would say always have a VPN on board. And although the VPN support on this is a little thinner than I might like, and again, you can download some other information about QNAP's own client, whether it's the client app or just more information on setting up your own QNAP VPN. There are still the support of things like WireGuard and more, and the other ones that you can route straight in OpenVPN too. But it's not as broad as I might like to have seen. If you are running those clients, you can, kind of play with those identities. I think you can enable a given number. I think it's 20 you can attach if you choose. And again, finally, you've got the web filter in there that you can assign to individual devices. But I would argue it's still not as kind of detailed as one might like. It's certainly not as kind of profile rich as, say, Synology Safe Access, but I think that's a different kind of user we're talking about here. But as you see, I've now assigned, I created a role in advance here, and this is one that stopped users accessing certain sites. So again, if we want, we can make sure that we can't access Twitter. Quite handy now, Elon Musk is slowly but surely buggering that platform up into the next world. But if we choose, we can make sure they're restricted in connectivity, and this can go for, your client users or anything. So now we've enabled that, and now my test machine via this connection will not be able to access Twitter. I would show you, but of course at the moment I'm using two connections, both wireless and wired, so chances are it will still try to go through there. Then you've got the standard system settings there for real-time information, and again you can export this as a report if you choose, or sign up for alerts. System settings, as you might expect for, system restore, backup, updates, and more. Indeed, when it comes to updates, since setting this device up for early testing and accessing it, a new firmware update has arrived. And if I choose to, it's going for manual, or I can always have it that it will always update itself automatically as they arrive, something I would always recommend. Now, you can create access control for certain admin users, or, tinker around with the initial administration account when you do set it up for the first time. It's largely linked to your MAC address there. But moving forward, you can go ahead and kind of change how and when people can access. Is remote access even available? And of course, you are going to have to maybe set up a lot of those DDNS settings there on remote access. And of course, as mentioned earlier on, there is a USB port, but access is largely FTP server based. It's quick and easy to do, but it is still going to be breadcrumb styly. It's not going to be a wonderful graphical user interface overall there. And that's really it in terms of kind of the overall protocol there. You can definitely tell that QuWAN and SD-WAN support is the big priority for this device. And although the controls seem a little rudimentary, one might say, against, say, a lot of their switch range, that's because it is a router. It would have been nice to see some of the switch stuff being ported onto this, or even if there'd been arguably PoE, but then I think we would be stemming outside of the router combination. The software itself, it does the job. I think it could stand to be a little bit more fully featured, and I think a lot of the QuWAN stuff, a lot of the advertising is a little lost by QNAP there, particularly in some regions where SD-WAN is used, if not as understood. But still, it is a user-friendly platform here. I'm not seeing anything that I don't like, and although I would have liked to have seen a little bit more user-friendly nature to it, I think when you reach this level of hardware, an in-house system IT admin is largely inevitable. Let's go back to the studio, summarise our review, and say what we think. So what do we think? Obviously, in terms of hardware, the 322 does not compromise on the hardware front. Short of that lack of wireless connectivity, which I think is a real shame I can't just add with a USB device on there. For the most part, the hardware is unparalleled. The fact that I can convert any of those 2.5s or 10Gs into either WANs or LAN at my behest and manage them and change them on the fly in that software is just tip-top for me there. Also, the software just covered all the bases for me. There were a few little maybe switch type appliances that weren't available during initial setup. I hate seagulls, but for the most part, everything I would want is there. And much like other times we've talked about modern switch and router software, you can clearly see that QNAP have tried to keep things a little bit more user-friendly, given that the majority of routers and network devices in the market that tap into the business or prosumer sector have a tendency to either look a little dated or just be too complex, being overly reliant on a system IT admin in your organisation to know what they are doing. They've clearly made steps to make it a little bit more chewable, a little bit more understandable, a little bit more for the layman, but it's still not quite there, I think, and I do think you're still going to need a decent amount of network technical nous to take care of this. Again, why this device couldn't be released as a Wi-Fi version as well, given they already have the QHora first generation that was Wi-Fi 6 and 10G, which is still available, by the way. I think it's about 250, 300 NICA now. Surprises me, because that kind of undercuts this device released a year and a half to 2 years later. But with more and more businesses, and particularly with users having to work remotely post-pandemic and the changing in work patterns, intelligent SD-WAN, or QWAN in this case, has an enormous benefit for even smaller organisations in a way that larger businesses have been benefiting from it for several years now. And having that integrated and rolled in with this system by default makes it even more attractive. Just remember that this should not be used as an alternative to your standard router in your home or business environment. This is to be used in conjunction in most cases with a decent wireless device. Think of this as a prosumer modem, which again I know is not going to be for everyone. The design I like, the connections I like, the lack of wireless connectivity I'm not a huge fan of, but for the most part, and given its uniqueness and the fact there's outside of some Cisco devices which are easily 5 to 7 times more expensive than this thing is unparalleled at what it's trying to do, and with that I do give it my big recommendation. Thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, do click like. I know YouTube basically devalued that button, but it does help us, myself and Eddie here at NAS Compares, to know what we're doing right and wrong. Click subscribe if you want to discuss or learn about this topic even more as we cover more and more routes and network devices in 2023. There should be a written review live, if not now, but otherwise in the next couple of days, linked in the description. And if you were thinking of buying this device and this video helped you, and if you were going to shop from Amazon anyway, use the link in the description. It costs you nothing extra, it takes you to Amazon, and it helps us by whatever you're buying. We get a little kickback from them that helps us carry on doing what we do. So if you want to go for that and this video helped you, that would be fantastic. Other than that, use the free advice section over on NAS Compares if you want some assistance from me and Eddie, or use the free community forum, Ask NAS Compares, where me, Eddie and other users can all knock our heads together and see if we can help you out. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.